I was hoping we could do outdoors actually, but that's selected. Last week we discussed why we're unable to understand the burdens of excessive welfarism. Free bus rides can and do increase mobility of women who might otherwise be less able to access goods and facilities. However, providing freebies without allocating special funds for these and making them more sustainable does put an undue burden on a country's treasury. On today's video, we're discussing a few differences that will help you understand whether something that is promised by a party goes into good welfare or is just part of the freebie schemes. If you haven't been here before, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to A Questioning Mind. I'm your host, Sagarika. Let's do this. So last week we discussed why our brains are not able to compute the issues with excessive welfarism. Welfarism is a part of every legitimate governance policy, and if you haven't watched that video where I discuss it, do go check out last week's video where you'll understand why we're not able to see the dangers and get excited with some of the poll time promises. So today we'll be discussing if you can put something into the freebie bucket or into the welfare bucket. We'll talk about 4 broad categories of differences. So with freebies and welfarism, the first difference that one must look at is the time duration. Freebies are typically for a temporary period of time. They are not sustainable beyond it, and welfarism is slightly more long-term. For example, freebies can include a one-time transfer of goods such as electronics, machines, clothing, and one-time cash benefits. Welfarism, on the other hand, includes a little more policy-oriented decisions such as utilities, insurance, and financial benefits. The second difference is between the demographic attention that is given to both. Freebies can very often target one particular demographic, such as a religious identity, a gender, or a social group, socioeconomic group. For example, free bus rides to women is an example of a freebie, so as is the subsidies for the Hajj travel that were provided to Muslim travelers during Hajj. These are some examples of parties or governments offering special demographic attention. This is not to say that this is morally wrong. Of course, a lot of these aim to bring people up to par. For example, free bus rides can and do increase mobility of women who might otherwise be less able to access goods and facilities. However, providing freebies without allocating special funds for these and making them more sustainable does put an undue burden on a country's treasury. So it is necessary to understand what is a freebie and what can help with long-term overall welfare. The third difference is intent. Freebies are often promotional ad campaigns for political parties or governments in power. They do function as a quick enticement to get something and to vote for a particular party or to keep a certain government in power. Often, just like with advertisements, a quick free something is to get a mind share of the voter base, of the citizenry, and to entice them to stay for a longer time with either a government or with a political party. Welfarism, on the other hand, has the intent to bring society up to an equitable base where people are able to access and afford some of the most basic requirements for a decent life. And in that, whereas there is some overlap, right, freebies can fall into the welfare category as well. However, again, welfarism is a lot more planned, targets people with intent to bring them at a level of social equity with the rest of the more elite, more privileged populations. Freebies, on the other hand, are very often poll-time promises made just to make sure that they're top of mind when a citizen is voting, and gets them a quick press of the button at that point. The fourth and one major difference is the depth of policy that freebies and welfarism are integrated into. For example, a freebie announced by a certain political party can last only during the poll time season. It's not necessary that when they come into power, they will integrate it into policy. For example, AAP has actually integrated their promise of free electricity and water. However, this is also not too deeply embedded. For example, another government coming into power after them can probably find the loopholes in the water department or the electricity department and decide that the losses are completely unsustainable and scrap this. Whereas true welfarism or good welfarism, apart from being more planned, is also more deeply integrated into policy. For example, if we see that free and fair access to education is something that has been promised since a very long time by many governments, because it is also part of our directive principles that guide internal policy. While there are not too many welfare schemes that allow for this, welfarism is typically much more deeply embedded into policy, and what it does is show the sustainability of a policy. If one is to offer free some things forever, one can imagine the stress that it will put on the treasury forever, right? That's not something any country or any government wants to do. That is why it ties back to the first point we discussed about their time duration. And so because freebies are deliberately designed to be more short-term, they are less integrated into a country's policy. So if you learned something, I hope you've liked this video and shared it with friends, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you for joining me today.